There's a building in suburban Detroit. From the outside, it looks like every other engineering facility on the block. Parking lot, loading dock, a sign with a German name on it. But inside that building, something unusual is happening. Electricity is being split into atoms, water is being torn apart, hydrogen on one side, oxygen on the other, and that hydrogen is being compressed, stored, and piped somewhere inside the facility. Bosch just opened a hydrogen production plant. So you'd expect the next part of this story to be about supply agreements, delivery contracts, fleet operators, cities, maybe a fueling network. You'd expect the hydrogen to go somewhere. We traced where it goes. It doesn't go to a market at all. Not to a gas station, not to a fleet operator, not to a city, not to a single external customer. Bosch built a hydrogen plant, and the hydrogen disappears inside their own building. That's strange. And the strangeness is the story. Because the question isn't what Bosch built. The question is why a company this size, this sophisticated, with this much visibility into the hydrogen industry, would build a production facility and keep everything it produces entirely to themselves. The answer to that question tells you something the headlines won't. Let's start with what actually happened, because the press release version of this story is missing most of the detail. In early 2025, Bosch opened a hydrogen production facility at its North American Engineering campus in Farmington Hills, Michigan, just outside Detroit. At the center of the facility is a 1.25 megawatt electrolyzer. If you're not familiar with electrolysis, the short version is this. You run electricity through water, the water splits into hydrogen and oxygen, you capture the hydrogen, compress it, and store it, clean. No combustion, no carbon, just electricity, water, and chemistry. The system Bosch installed is genuinely sophisticated. It can produce meaningful volumes of hydrogen on site. The facility includes compression systems, storage infrastructure, and distribution lines running directly into their engineering labs. And now we know where the hydrogen actually goes. It feeds fuel cell test rigs, where engineers are validating how fuel cells perform under real operating conditions. It powers hydrogen combustion engine prototypes. It runs engineering validation systems where the goal is understanding performance, durability, and failure modes before anything reaches a customer. This is not a commercial hydrogen plant, it's a closed loop. Produce hydrogen, consume hydrogen, measure the results, refine the designs. The hydrogen is a tool. The facility exists entirely in service of Bosch's engineering process. And once you see that, once you understand what this actually is, a more interesting question surfaces. Why does a company like Bosch need its own hydrogen loop in the first place? To answer that, you need to understand what Bosch actually is. Because Bosch is not a car company. A lot of people don't fully appreciate this. Bosch is a systems supplier. They build the components and subsystems that go inside vehicles and industrial machines. The parts most people never see. Fuel injectors, braking systems, sensors, power electronics. And over the last decade, Bosch has placed enormous bets across the entire hydrogen value chain. They're developing hydrogen fuel cells, the technology that converts hydrogen directly into electricity to power motors. They've announced partnerships with truck makers, bus operators, and industrial equipment companies. They're developing hydrogen internal combustion engines, a slightly different path, where hydrogen burns in a modified engine rather than being converted in a fuel cell. Lower cost, faster pathway to market, interesting trade-offs. And they're developing electrolyzers, the same core technology they just installed in Farmington Hills, positioning themselves to sell those systems to companies and utilities that want to produce hydrogen themselves. So Bosch is building three distinct hydrogen businesses simultaneously: production, conversion, combustion. And this is where the story shifts. Because building across all three at once creates an engineering problem that most coverage never mentions. When you're developing complex energy systems, especially ones that interact with each other, you cannot test them in isolation. A fuel cell doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a thermal environment under variable load with specific hydrogen purity requirements at a particular pressure. If you want to know how your fuel cell performs in the real world, you need to test it with real hydrogen under real conditions over extended cycles. You can't do that reliably by shipping cylinders from a third-party supplier. The logistics are too complex, the variables too uncontrolled, the cost too high for long-duration programs. So Bosch built its own hydrogen loop, not because hydrogen is ready for the market, because their engineering process requires it. This is the distinction the headlines miss entirely. There is a difference between a company deploying a technology at scale and a company preparing to deploy it when conditions are right. Bosch is in the second category. And understanding why conditions aren't right yet, that's where this story gets much larger than one facility in Michigan. Let's zoom out. Because the Bosch facility doesn't just tell us something about Bosch, it tells us something about where hydrogen actually is right now. The story we've been told goes like this. The world is shifting away from fossil fuels, and green hydrogen is the critical bridge fuel for the sectors that can't electrify. Heavy transport, industrial heat, shipping, steel, cement. Hydrogen will do what batteries can't, and the investment numbers seem to confirm the narrative. Billions of dollars, government programs, hundreds of announced projects. But follow the money all the way down and you hit the first wall. The cost problem hasn't been solved. Green hydrogen, produced via electrolysis powered by renewables, still costs somewhere between $4 and $8 per kilogram in most markets. Gray hydrogen made from natural gas costs a fraction of that. And most existing industrial hydrogen consumption is still gray. The clean premium is real, it's large, and it hasn't closed nearly as fast as optimists projected 5 years ago. So you might think, solve the cost problem and the rest follows. But that's where you hit the second wall. Even if you solve production costs, even if you bring green hydrogen down to cost parity, you immediately run into infrastructure. You can build a hydrogen plant, but then what? Where does it go? How does it get there? The pipeline infrastructure for hydrogen barely exists at scale. Trucking it is expensive and inefficient. Building new distribution networks requires coordinated investment from producers, distributors, and end users simultaneously. The classic chicken and egg problem that has stalled dozens of industries before this one. So you might think, solve infrastructure through policy? Force coordination. Subsidize the build-out. But that's where you hit the third wall. In the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act created hydrogen production tax credits that should, in theory, dramatically improve economics for green projects. But the implementation rules, particularly around what qualifies as genuinely clean hydrogen, have been contested, revised, and are still creating uncertainty for developers trying to make final investment decisions. In Europe, the story is similar. Regulatory ambition running well ahead of commercial reality. Cost, then infrastructure, then policy. Each wall reveals another behind it. And here's the part most people miss. Even if you solved all three simultaneously, hydrogen still doesn't scale automatically. Because scaling requires that buyers trust the supply chain enough to redesign their factories, their fleets, their logistics around a fuel that has never been reliably delivered at the volumes they need. That trust doesn't exist yet. It has to be built. And it gets built through exactly the kind of work happening inside facilities like Farmington Hills. Years of quiet engineering before a single commercial molecule ships. And because if hydrogen can't break through all of this, not partially, not eventually, but concurrently and at scale, then entire sectors don't decarbonize. Steel doesn't decarbonize. Shipping doesn't decarbonize. Heavy transport runs on diesel for another generation. These aren't abstract concerns. They are the difference between climate targets being met and not being met. Now look at all of that. And then look at what Bosch actually did. They didn't build a commercial hydrogen plant. They didn't sign long-term supply contracts. They didn't announce production volumes or off-take agreements. They built a lab. A sophisticated, well-engineered, internally useful lab. And that choice, made by one of the most technically sophisticated industrial companies on the planet, a company with deep visibility into real hydrogen markets, is a signal that should stop you cold. The companies closest to hydrogen are still treating it like a research project, not a commercial market. That's the real headline. If you want to understand how this system actually works, not just the headlines, but the economics, the value chain, the real bottlenecks, that's exactly what I break down inside H2 Hub. Link in the description. But this is where the story gets more interesting. Because the Bosch facility isn't evidence that hydrogen is failing. It's evidence that Bosch is doing something far more sophisticated than either optimism or pessimism. They're executing a strategic hedge. Here's what that looks like in practice. They are investing now in engineering capability, in product development, in manufacturing readiness, because the cost of not being ready when the market turns is enormous. If hydrogen adoption accelerates in heavy transport, Bosch wants to be the supplier of choice for fuel cells and hydrogen engines. Getting there takes years of engineering work. You cannot start when the market arrives. You have to start before. But they are not scaling production or making irreversible capital commitments because the timing is genuinely uncertain. Nobody knows whether hydrogen-heavy transport will become the dominant solution, or whether battery trucks will continue improving faster than expected, or whether some other configuration wins. The market hasn't decided yet. So Bosch does something precise. They invest in readiness without betting on timing. The capital cost of a 1.25 megawatt electrolyzer and testing infrastructure is, for a company of Bosch's size, manageable. But the engineering knowledge they're accumulating, how to run hydrogen systems, how to validate them, how to engineer around failure modes, is worth far more than the facility itself. That knowledge is the real investment. If hydrogen adoption accelerates, Bosch can scale quickly, with validated systems and experienced engineers. If adoption is slower, the cost is contained, and the knowledge is still useful. This is how sophisticated industrial companies navigate technology transitions under genuine uncertainty. And it's almost completely invisible in the media coverage of hydrogen. There's one more layer worth pulling apart. Why Michigan? Bosch didn't open this facility in California. Didn't open it in Texas, where cheap renewable power is abundant. Didn't open it in Europe, closer to where hydrogen policy is most developed. They opened it in Metro Detroit. Detroit's identity is built on internal combustion. The engineers, the toolmakers, the supply chain, all of it was optimized for pistons and combustion chambers and exhaust systems. And the electric vehicle transition threatened to render large parts of that expertise obsolete. But hydrogen is different. Hydrogen combustion engines are architecturally much closer to conventional engines than battery electric drivetrains are. The mechanical engineering, the thermal management, the manufacturing processes, there's meaningful carryover. So when Bosch builds a hydrogen engineering facility in Farmington Hills, they're drawing on an ecosystem that is genuinely relevant to what they're building, at exactly the moment when that ecosystem is most motivated to reinvent itself. Detroit isn't just a location, it's a strategic resource. Let's come back to where we started. Bosch built a hydrogen plant, and the hydrogen goes nowhere. Now you know what that actually means. It means the industry is still in the engineering phase, not the deployment phase. It means the companies with the deepest technical knowledge are investing in capability and optionality, not making irreversible bets. It means the gap between the hydrogen headline story and the hydrogen ground truth is still very, very wide. The hydrogen economy hasn't started yet. What you're watching in Farmington Hills, in engineering labs across Europe and Asia, in the careful capital allocation of every serious industrial company in this space, is companies preparing for a market that still doesn't exist. And the companies who understand that are the ones preparing to own it. If this kind of analysis matters to you, the kind that goes underneath the headline and tells you what's actually happening in the energy transition, subscribe. There are a lot of voices telling you what the news is. We're here to tell you what it means. See you next time.